Fantastic.
Alright guys, let's do a little bit of conspiracy theory crafting, and let's pick my favourite target, the greens, because pretty much everything the greens do is dog shit. They're a bunch of evil retards. So, I'm gonna just pick on wind farms today. Like, we're not even gonna go through the economic analysis of it and how they never pay for themselves and how the wind turbine blades can't be recycled and all of that. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to go all in on conspiracy theory, and we're going to see if we can logic through this with common sense, a wind turbine conspiracy theory. So, wind turbine blades are made up of epoxies, resins, and fiberglasses. They have a ton of a compound called bisphenol A, BPA, which is carcinogenic. It's very bad for you. If you guys remember a little while back, it was a big hubbub because it was in water bottles and stuff like that. Basically, it's like a little plasticky thing that can be used in adhesives and resins, and it is carcinogenic. It is not good for you. So if wind turbine blades are made of a brittle fiberglassy material and have a ton of this bisphenol A in them and are very high up and are designed to catch wind, if the wind turbine blades were to crack and spread fibrous fiberglass material with bisphenol A epoxies and resins in it, as high up as they are and in direct current of the wind, wouldn't in theory they be spreading a fibrous material with a carcinogenic compound on them over a very wide, large area? Okay, since these fiberglassy materials are brittle, they would tend to crack if bent or vibrated. In theory, wind turbine blades tend to vibrate a fair bit, so they would probably tend to crack reasonably quickly, I would imagine. Because of that, wouldn't they then be susceptible to spreading the material everywhere? Let's suppose for a moment that these wind farms are placed in areas where the wind flow would carry the cracked fibrous material with the bisphenol A in them over a wide area of water catchment. Wouldn't that, in theory, contaminate water in the catchment with bisphenol A, and in theory lead to an increase in the cancer-causing carcinogens in water, which is currently a problem in places like Victoria? So let us further assume that since these wind turbine blades cannot be recycled, mostly because they're fibrous and have carcinogenic compounds in them, wherever they are placed in, land tips, landfill, wouldn't in theory they then have runoff and deteriorate over time because of exposure to sun, etc.? Wouldn't they eventually crack, break down, and spread bisphenol A into the local water supply, wherever such a tip might be? Wouldn't that, in theory, also contaminate water supplies? And lastly, areas where they are offshore in wind farms, where they are susceptible to corrosion by not only the chloride ions and chlorine from the salt water, but also direct sunlight reflected off of water and direct sunlight in the offshore wind farms. Wouldn't they in theory break down there as well, and subsequently after breaking down spread a ton of bisphenol A across the water, which would also further contribute to the microplastic problem in the water supply and fish, not drinking water supply, but offshore saltwater supply, and then after that be ingested by fish and get into fish such as tuna, because that was an issue there for a while as well. They were finding a ton of microplastics in tuna and stuff like that. Okay, so that's the mechanisms for our conspiracy theory. So what would the strategy be? Like, who would benefit from big stupid wind farms that spread carcinogens everywhere, basically weakening, sickening a population, giving them cancers, making them generally more unwell? Well, let's suppose for a second it's not too much of a massive stretch of the imagination that this subversion is from China to weaken Australia as a country, and our political class is bought and paid for, or incredibly stupid and ignoring this issue at all of our expense. Think about it. Where is most of this green stuff manufactured? China. Why hasn't Australia completely outlawed and banned the use of bisphenol A in materials? Like, it was one of the later countries to do it. Like, it was still legal to use it in drink bottles there for a while, even though everyone knew it was, you know, really bad for you. Okay, now it's in wind farms, which are high up in direct wind current, and it's stuck to fiberglasses that in wind farm turbine blades, that can, in theory, crack and in theory spread them everywhere the wind can carry them from the wind turbine location. Even if the location is offshore, it would go into the sea and in theory into fish and our seafood.
Jesus.
Here is another strategy that infecting us all with bisphenol A might be, because bisphenol A, when it has been administered in studies into rats and things, has lowered the testosterone of rats and things. What does this do to humans when you lower testosterone? It takes away a ton of your energy. It's not dissimilar to Egypt deliberately causing heart disease in order to reduce protests. If you have lower energy levels, you're less likely to protest shitty policy by government, and the policy is likely to get much further before there's significant pushback. It would aid in totalitarian implementation of policy a ton if you were to infect your population with something that reduces their testosterone and reduces their energy, and as a result of that, their will to resist government in the form of protest. In theory, that might have been what COVID was as well, and what the vaccine was for as well, since we know that the spike protein can directly cause heart damage, and one of the symptoms of myocarditis and heart damage is a lower energy level, you're quicker to run out of breath, like that sort of thing. That, in theory, would also lend itself to the idea that it was used to further enable totalitarian and authoritarian governments, rather than, you know, just flat population control by, you know, increasing the excess death to what it is and has been for years and years now, like 3 years. It's like still up to this day. If you are interested in learning more about the excess death, I would suggest Dr. John Campbell. You can find him on Rumble, completely uncensored, but he's also on YouTube, but he has to watch what he says on YouTube. So there it is, guys. What do you think? Do you think wind farms are from ideology from the climate change cult? Or do you think it's more sinister within the Greens parties and complete subversion from China in order to infect us, contaminate all of our water supplies and seafood with bisphenol A in order to make us more compliant to forms of totalitarian left-wing government, and obviously, you know, lessen property rights, more government controls, that sort of thing. Because, like, they're still trying in government with all, like, digital ID and everything to basically take away your freedoms, your freedom of speech. I've been at least online, a shitposting advocate for a proper Bill of Rights in Australia for ages now, including freedom of speech, freedom of movement, and gun rights back in Australia. Because the Howard government taking away gun rights was probably one of the worst things to happen to Australia, particularly with its infiltration by China and its location and dependence on trade with China. It was always going to be a horrible threat. So, like, if it were to do with climate change, we're just going to theory craft around like a Greens Party response here. If it were to combat climate change, in theory, why aren't they all in on nuclear energy? Because, quite frankly, France, when it had its nuclear reactors and its patent to reuse nuclear fuel and everything like that, that was pretty bloody good. That was pretty good shit for France. And zero carbon dioxide from nuclear reactors. I mean, in theory, you would have nuclear waste. You would have to make sure you stored said nuclear waste very, very far away from, you know, underground water aquifers, any water sources, that sort of thing, to prevent groundwater contamination and all that sort of thing. But there have already been like successful uses of nuclear reactors, not particularly in the Soviet Union, where like that with like Chernobyl and all that, where yeah, they built shitty commie ones and the commie ones blew up. But there still have been successful uses, like France's use of nuclear reactors and recycling of nuclear waste to, you know, reuse it. Like, that was very successful. Like, in theory, that would be the most green energy, right? Why aren't the Greens interested in that? Not only not interested in that, like, concerned with environmental pollution from that, but they're not concerned with the environmental pollution from bisphenol A, from shitty, like, wind farms. And they're not, like, either concerned with the massive, like, local temporal weather impacts from black solar panels either. Because, like, the square meter area of solar panels is quite large. And they've got to be black to attract the sun, right? So you have one extremely large black area, which, you know, generates a lot of heat, which can cause local weather instability when it's like a super large, you know, meter squared area of space. They also need to clear that, you know, area of space as well for the solar panels. So, yeah, that means no farming, no buildings, that sort of thing as well. Like, the Greens have been, you know, dog shit hypocrites for a while, though. Like, the Black Summer bushfires, that was... a lot of it was on them for not backburning. Like, in theory, they wanted to, like, protect the environment by not backburning, and then, you know, the Black Summer bushfires happened and killed, like, a large percentage of all the koalas and everything. Like, they're idiots. They don't know what they're doing. Like, they seem evil. Like, everything they do is, like, detrimental to, like, humans and the environment. Like, they're even, like major supporters of, like, Palestine over, like, Israel and, like, global, caliphate support for, you know, Islamic theocracies. Like, directly supporting Hamas in the Israel-Palestine war is basically supporting Iran by proxy. And, like, who would want to do that? Like, supporting Iran by proxy, that's basically asking for a global Islamic caliphate with the supreme leader at the head. And, like, a ton of Greens just do that. They're like, they don't even think, they just support Palestine. And like they're also like super heavy into the LGBTQ and all the Marxist shit as well. Like a ton of their members are. It looks suspicious to me. It looks like, you know, deliberate Marxist subversion of government and Western democracy. Like, if Western democracy ever does fail, it's not going to be because like Western democracy didn't work. It's going to be from the Marxist subversion of it. Like, it's like it, yeah. It's not going to prove anything if the West does fail. All it's going to prove is Marxism's still dog shit, but, you know, because it's so malevolent, it managed to infect the West, and the West died of it. But, like, I don't think the West will die of it. Like, it's way harder to keep, like, a shitty Marxist country with no money alive with, like, slave labour than it is to keep a capitalist one with a strong market alive. Like, yeah. Like, in theory, we gotta run out the clock and beat off the submersion and we win. That's the idea with Marxism. But it still does blow me away how many retarded boomers still support the idea of Marxism, even though you can have a conversation with them and they will articulate to you how little they trust government and the sociopaths in government. They will articulate that to you and still not quite realise that Marxism is the abolishment of their property rights to give the narcissists and sociopaths in government more power over them and their property rights. Like, it does not click with them. Like, you say Marxism and they're envisioning, you know, some sort of no form of government where there is just some sort of, you know, massive community pool of resources that everyone can draw from at a whim. There is enough for everyone. They're not looking at it as, you know, no forceful distribution of property and resources by the government to people in theory the government thinks needs them, which would be voted democratically, so you're essentially voting your rights away to the government. But they never realise this. It doesn't click in their head that they're voting away their rights when they talk about property rights and redistribution. It doesn't click in their heads at all. Like, in a capitalist society, you're free to gather as much property and capital that you want, and then there is nothing stopping you from then donating your property and capital to causes that you think are good. They want to force people that have property and capital to donate it, I guess, out of resentment for them not having any. I don't know. I don't know what it is. And, like, that just blows past, like, any of their understanding of, like, you know, the causes of inflation through market control and the influence of government on markets and monopolies and that sort of thing. Like, they just do not understand that. They don't seem to be able to conceive of the government as a bad actor. And, like, it was the same during COVID. Like, they trusted the vaccines, like, inherently, even though they'd, like, never before been a compelled medical treatment. Like, I don't think even the polio vaccine was, like, compelled, like, with the idea that you will lose your, like, freedom of movement and you will lose your ability to make capital and income if you do not have it in certain government jobs. By the way, the idea of a government job isn't free market either. Like, they don't quite get it. It's the same as Biden's claims of, oh, he's created so many new jobs, and they're like all government jobs, and they're all like IRS. So in theory, they're going to rob, you know, actual productive people even more by, you know, through the government. It's like stupid shit. And it's like the same with, like, leftists in Australia. They don't grasp the idea. tell you what, like, if you want to, like, see in, like, a Western country, like, their equivalent of what is essentially, like, a pogrom back in the day, where they just, you know, beat people who were Jews that were passing, look at their treatment of people like Abiy Yemeni. Like, Abiy's not, you know, crazy right-wing or anything like that. He's not like a right-wing extremist. The idea of a right-wing or extreme right-wing or far right-wing extremist is fucking ludicrous as well. What do you mean by that? Do you mean someone who supports property rights and doesn't trust government? Congratulations, you've just, you know, you've just described a libertarian, which is on the left wing of the spectrum in theory, and like, that's mostly what Abiy is. Like, he doesn't trust government, which is like wise these days. But like, the treatment of Abiy by, like, just passers-by, like, just completely indoctrinated passers-by is crazy. They, like, nearly spit on him, and they're, like, abusive towards him, like, yelling out names like Nazi and shit like that. Like, that's something straight out of the Cultural Revolution, that shit. That's like, you know, that's like an indoctrinated class of people going after a public enemy. Like that's Soviet Union going after kulaks and that sort of thing. That's not normal. And like, they would never be able to articulate any of this, by the way. They have no understanding of the political spectrum. They have no understanding of property rights. They couldn't describe to you, if you asked them, what far right means. And like, for that matter, they'd probably try and say something, oh, some sort of vague sense of racial superiority and nationalism and imperialism. And like, okay, imperialism and nationalism are not inherently right-wing. The Soviet Union was incredibly imperialistic. It seized a bunch of Baltic states. Same with China. Like, they're extremely nationalistic. Like, everything about their community is support of the nation at the expense of the individual. That is nationalism to a T. What do they mean by imperialism and nationalism? What do they mean by racial superiority, for that matter, either? Like, and like, their worldview is fucking simplistic as hell. It's like, okay, there's rich and poor, rich are evil and poor are good for some reason. Like, no, that doesn't track either. Like, they're idiots. They have, like, stupidly simplified worldview and the confidence to persecute people that they deem evil without even thinking about it, without even understanding what they're saying. And like, that's the left wing in Australia. That's why we have like a uniparty. Like, that's why we have no right wing. We've got Labor and we've got Liberals. And yes, they're both left wing. But yeah, there's my conspiracy theory on wind farms. You heard it here first, guys.
I got it!